And I'm back. Thanks for checking out this next video on the World Series of Bitcoin and Bitcoin 1776. In this video, I'm going to talk about the economics primarily of Bitcoin 1776, which also deals with the software because the software aside the economics is not particularly interesting, in my opinion. Or to put it another way, it's very similar to the code used by Bitcoin itself, bitcoin.org, ORG, BTC. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about the software. I should probably go ahead and just start by reading this. So I will read this aloud here. Software summary: Bitcoin is inflating. Bitcoin 1776 will decrease the rate of inflation. Bitcoin must issue coins until it reaches 21 million. These coins are distributed to outside parties for the incursion of costs. Costs are variable such that higher Bitcoin's values incur more costs, and thus more selling of coins and pull of resources away from the environment. There comes a point upon which the environment cannot sustain the allocation, and either the value of Bitcoin or the value of everything else must collapse. Bitcoin 1776 reduces the annual strain upon the environment by over 95%. For Bitcoin 1776 and every successive version respecting a 1776 million coin max. Bitcoin 1776 blocks are built better. Bitcoin blocks are created motivated by a fixed subsidy. This fixed subsidy is added to consumer demand to create an ecosystem. Providers in this ecosystem must balance their allocation of resources between obtainment of the subsidy and providing responsiveness to consumer demand. If factors were weighed equally 50-50, then a doubling of consumer demand would increase block speed, and if unequal, then one or the other would not affect the outcome. Bitcoin weighs fixed subsidy to minimum consumer demand 99.96% to 0.04%, or 25,000 to 1. Bitcoin 1776 adjusts this scale to achieve a ratio of 56 to 1. By providing a more balanced compensation, block builders become motivated to respond to demand and build blocks faster during peak hours, improving customer service. Bitcoin 1776 seeks long-term internal support by a vision of fee allocation and collective cooperation instead of enormous inflation and privatized sponsorship. So, so let's go through this. This is a fun bit of reading, and frankly speaking, I think I do write in a very complex way and very quickly. So I can understand if someone was to read this and feel slightly overwhelmed, paragraph to paragraph. So let's slow this down some. Reduces the strain upon the environment by over 95%. It's for the purpose of mining, it's actually 98%, just to let you know. However, there's also the initiating coins or pre-mine of 550,000 roughly, 550,000 coins. So if you combine those together, it's still a 95% reduction on environmental strain. And any other coin that does likewise would have a similar effect. So if you respect 17.76 million coins and you start at the fork date of July 4th, 2018, then you're going to naturally incur a very similar result as this coin does. So annual strain upon the environment. So this phrase means two things. One is energy consumed. So for this coin, if this coin was to maintain the same value of Bitcoin, then the just energy, the production which goes into creating ASIC equipment, the warehouse space, all of that economic, all those economic costs would be reduced by, let's just stick with 95%, would be reduced by 95% or more. And so naturally for people who are concerned about the environment, but I would encourage people to think beyond the environment meaning electrical costs and global warming, but also just think about human power, resource allocation that is spent toward mining equipment, mining, and this entire purpose. Um, Gamers in particular are always frustrated that some manufacturers are diverting resources from making gaming equipment. Granted, that's not a high value, a high purpose item, but they are always frustrated that manufacturers are moving from making their gaming equipment, and they've moved over into making Bitcoin equipment. And Bitcoin equipment, for those who don't know, is practically worthless after 1 year. So, ignoring or added to the electrical and global warming strain, which can be interpreted by the word environment, there's this other issue of just this insane amount of waste and destruction of physical equipment and human effort that just has no value whatsoever, no long-term value to society whatsoever, not at all unless it, like NASA, where NASA was like creating rockets, and then we used that technology to create side view mirrors. There might be some extraneous benefits that are created, but the products themselves have no value. Okay, and then there's the other interpretation of environment, which just means the economies, or the cost of the coin. So this was talked about a little bit more in a previous video. Let me just go ahead and reference this a little bit. So whereas Bitcoin at $10,000, it costs the economy of Bitcoin. The economy of Bitcoin has to generate $7 billion to maintain a consistent $10,000 value until the halving. And then the economies of Bitcoin 1776 at a $1 million value, they only have to generate $13 billion. Or if you assume this would only happen after 2021, then they'd have to generate $7 billion of value. So $10,000 is roughly it's worth less right now, but $10,000 is roughly what Bitcoin is worth today. And if it maintains that value, then it has to have new customers come into the economy and pay, divert their funds, which they should be using these for investment purposes. But let's just be crazy here and say that people are like foregoing education tools. There's societal needs that you need. However, for Bitcoin to maintain a $10,000 value, it must consume $7 billion of USD resources, whereas Bitcoin 1776, after the halving, would to maintain a $1 million value, it would consume the exact same number, or the exact same amount of resource. So you can just see that the economy of Bitcoin 1776 on the USD basis is substantially more efficient than Bitcoin. But the USD efficiency is also an electrical efficiency, and it's also a productive goods efficiency, or hard production efficiency. So I think that covers that quite well, and I'm very pleased with that. So let's move on to the block building. Now, some of this becomes a little bit outdated with SegWit, and my information on SegWit is I'm not as informed with how this changes on SegWit. So I have a little side note here when it comes to addressing that, and I'll address that here in a bit. However, let's talk about fixed subsidy to minimum consumer demand. Okay, some people will tell you that there is no minimum consumer demand, that you don't have to pay any amount of Bitcoins in order to get your Bitcoin transaction included within a block, and that is true. However, the miners are never punished for excluding transactions that pay 0 Bitcoins. So so for minimum consumer demand, I am assuming a number above 0 and then also a number that is perfectly divisible. And for in computer code, that means one satoshi per byte. So some people will tell you, well, you could pay one satoshi for you can pay 0 satoshis, which is the small unit of a Bitcoin. It's a fraction of a Bitcoin is a satoshi. So some people will tell you that you could pay 0 satoshis for a transaction, but that's not. There's no reason that anyone would ever accept that. But they're just like, well, you can. They're just, anyways, confusing people. And then these same people will say, well, if you want to pay more than 0, you can pay 1 satoshi for a transaction. But this is also not exactly true either, because transactions are a varying number of bytes or size or complexity. I'll refer to it as complexity. I think that'll come across clearer. Transactions are a varying level of complexity, and so if someone was to pay 1 satoshi, whether or not it's easy or difficult to include that transaction, then the miners would include all the easy transactions, and they would exclude all the complex transactions. However, if you pay 1 satoshi per byte, which satoshi is the minimum fraction of a Bitcoin, if you pay 1 satoshi per byte, then you are paying a perfectly equal. Your payment is equal to the complexity of your transaction perfectly. So if someone, without excluding all transactions, a person cannot accept a rate of less than 1 satoshi per byte if they want to be perfectly even in all the work that they perform. If they want to get paid the same for all the work, then they must accept 1 satoshi per byte or more. Okay, so that's what that means by minimum consumer demand. And the fixed subsidy is sometimes referred to the block reward. This is incorrect. It's the block subsidy. Subsidy meaning that the miners get this fee regardless of the work that they have to perform or regardless of consumer demand. And then the block reward includes both of these things, the subsidy and the consumer demand, or the consumer contribution to the block. Okay, so in Bitcoin pre-SegWit, it's weighted approximately 25,000 to 1. In essence, there's just no value to the block reward. I mean to the consumer subsidy portion of the consumer contribution to the block reward. So you see this in the Bitcoin chat rooms that everybody gets upset about this, and they're like, how come the miners such as Antpool, I believe could be, how come the miners such as Antpool are refusing SegWit transactions, or how come they're refusing transactions that pay 5 satoshis per byte? And the reason is that, and it's a fairly clearly understood reason for rational people, the reason is that by avoiding these transactions, they are still competing for, if you were to reference the price pool in terms of dollars, they're still competing for a price pool of closer to $250,000, and they are only losing out on about $1,000. So they're still competing for the $250,000, and they're losing out on about $1,000 or so. So they just choose not to do it sometimes, and this pisses off everyone because they're like, you're cheating, you're trying to destroy our system. But it's important to recognize there's virtually no benefit other than, keeping people happy. There's no economic benefit to keeping people happy in the Bitcoin system. Unless there's a total collapse, and then of course that would be terrible. But excluding total collapse, there's very little economic benefit. So this software, Bitcoin 1776, changes this to 56 to 1. And realistically, you do want a number that's bigger than 1 satoshi. So let's pretend someone's paying 10 satoshis per byte. then it's more like 5 to 1 or something thereabout. And so um, 10 satoshis per byte is kind of a standard, roughly what it can amount to quite often. So maybe 5 to 1. So and also the subsidy is reduced at the same schedule that Bitcoin's subsidy reduces. So while it might be, let's just say it's 5 to 1. Let's say it's 5 to 1 right now. Next year it'll be 2.5 to 1, and then the year after that it'd be like 1 to 1. Every 4 years. So in like an 8-year period or something, it could get to about a 1 to 1 ratio. And for Bitcoin to achieve a 1 to 1 ratio, it would have to wait quite a while. Or with SegWit, it's actually much closer. So let me go into SegWit and the changes that makes in the Bitcoin software, because I don't want to talk too long without presenting that. Okay, where do I have this? Okay, here we go. Okay, okay, so SegWit does change this quite a lot. So SegWit, and this is often referenced in terms of transaction size. So without a SegWit transaction, the size is roughly 225 bytes. And if it's 1 Satoshi per byte, then Satoshi. SegWit transaction is a little closer to 170. And there's this whole weighting issue, which is a little bit confusing, but my understanding is that you can utilize, instead of 1 megabyte, and I think the average Bitcoin block right now is roughly 2 megabytes, even though it's stated as a maximum of 1 megabyte, but with this weighting issue, you can get this up to about 4 megabytes. So just moving on a little bit. This can, whereas before your transactions were limited to about 2,000 transactions per block, with SegWit it's roughly 16,000 transactions per block once you combine this weighting issue, weight or 4 megabyte block possible with the smaller byte size per transaction. So it increases 8 times. It's a substantial increase. And this can decrease the minimum subsidy from 277,000 technically to about 450 to 1. So okay, yeah. So with SegWit, instead of the 2,500 that I referenced here, it's more like 450, something close to that possible. And with Bitcoin 1776, it's roughly, it's 56 to 1 or 50 to 1. So it's still substantially better. But it is important to note that SegWit improves this markedly. Now let's go ahead and talk about the other economics of Bitcoin 1776, which are the other things impacting economics, which are the distribution of the initiating coins. So let's talk about these. So these 100,000 coins are for general use, which would basically be distributed about 25% a year. But for just to give myself breathing room, I say not to be fully tradable until after 3 years. But you could think of this about 25,000 coins a year. And then for the restricted 300,000 coins, now those will actually come out much faster, and they will be much more front-loaded to the people who participate in the system early, because the coins have less value and people determine their participation level based on a USD economic agreement. So maybe 100 to 200,000, maybe 100,000 more likely, of these coins might be distributed in year 1. And then maybe 50,000 in year 2, and then 25,000 in year 3. It might have a declining, a very quickly declining rate, but it could easily be over 100,000 in year 1, paid to motivate participation. So let's just talk about these two real quick. So these two things put coins onto the marketplace. there are going to be 77,000 coins that can one day eventually be mined ever. Um, but there are 400,000 coins which in theory could be placed in the marketplace immediately. Um, so it's important to keep in mind, even though on an annualized ongoing rate, these numbers are correct if they were sustained over long periods of time. In the short time frame, in particular the first 2 or 3 years, in the first 2 or 3 years, there's going to be a substantial amount of coins that are distributed um, for these reasons to motivate development, basically, of society and technology and innovation of political systems. So, if the people choose to hold on to these coins, which of course would be what I recommend, but who knows what people will choose to do. If people choose to hold on to these coins, then it has no impact. But if they choose to sell these coins to pay for costs that they have, then it has impact. And this is where people they like there's a coin out there. I'll just reference it, IOTA, and this coin has no inflation. However, there's a substantial amount of foundational coins, which I think was like maybe 30% of the coins. I could be wrong. Maybe it's 50%, or maybe all the coins were foundational coins. I think all the coins were technically, but I think to this date it might be 30% of the coins are foundational coins. So these coins are sold to pay for costs. Now I'm totally fine with selling the coins to pay for costs, but whereas IOTA has a kind of grand vision and grand partnerships and grand technology which they must pay for themselves, and therefore they sell the coins to pay for these things. And they could just, this is where people get like, it could just end. Of course, this could end quicker too, but um, anyways, if IOTA, the theory is if the IOTA Foundation does what they say that they're going to do, then these coins shouldn't have a negative impact on the economy. However, with this, our objectives are much smaller than I think any other blockchain in one sense. We won't really have a lot of technical assistance with our coin in particular. We will probably the majority of our technical funds will probably be distributed to people who contribute to Bitcoin itself, because our software is just going to be so similar and it's based on Bitcoins, and it's always going to, I hope it remains that way. So we will probably distribute our technical funds to support Bitcoin itself. We will have some, of course, awareness, cultural building, or marketing, whatever you want to phrase it, which will be unique to our own product, or our own purpose of Midnight Discovery, I should say. But all the same, Bitcoin 1776, yeah, so let me clarify that. Bitcoin 1776 as a software product is fully done, nothing more that the foundation, if you want to call it that, is agreeing to do. There's some hopes that someone may someday do, which and that someday someone will ultimately probably fall on to the technical contributors of Bitcoin, or if our software starts to create substantial social interest, then maybe some people volunteer. But currently we don't have volunteers that do software development, and it's not something I'm trying to rush into, because I would rather wait until the Bitcoin people and our people start to merge over, and that would be a lot easier socially and for a lot of other reasons. So, anyways, so yeah, 100,000 of these coins will be distributed for some general purpose whatsoever, and 300,000 will be given to people who participate in the political system, and then they will have the choice that they will all have to make their choices individually. Do I sell? Do I hold? And their choices will affect the economy in the short term. In the short term. However, in the long term, these economic charts are what will play out. Okay, but this is something just to be aware of with any coin. Whereas IOTA and Ethereum, likewise, I think their foundations might have received roughly 30% of the total coins to fund their very, very grand purposes. So I don't want to say that they were misused for that, but they have a very complex purpose. Um, with this coin, there's only 3% of the coins that are used to fund our purposes, which are just less complex. And they're also less foundation driven, more distributed, is what most people would use. Okay, and then for the economy. Oh man, I'm sorry, I got off track a little. For the economy, 151,375 coins are to be sold between 2 and 300,000, or okay, let's just think about this. 150,000 coins. So these coins are going to be sold. I will, when I make the actual pledge to Midnight Discovery, I'll release this document which says exactly when they will be sold, exactly how many coins will be sold, assuming it's legally acceptable to do so. But exactly when they'll be sold, exactly how many coins will, the price and the amount of coins that will be sold at these prices, and then also what value those dollars will be used to repurchase coins if the price varies more than, it's going to basically be around 30%. Every time the price varies downward by 30%, then this will trigger a rebuy of any coins that were sold trigger a rebuy greater than the amount of coins that were sold. So if just to keep it simple again, if 10,000 coins were sold at $4, the rebuy amount would be 20,000 coins. So if you repeat this process multiple times, then you can easily consume all the coins that were distributed for other purposes. Hopefully that would be part of the objective. You can start to stabilize the price point of the coin, and in particular what this is more applicable for, just so people know, it won't really prevent the price from going down. Like, the price could still go down infinitely. There are 17 million coins out there that Bitcoin holders have, and they can do whatever they want with those 17 million coins. And if the price never goes above $2, then none of this triggers. And if they were all to try to sell their coins at day one as quick as they could, then there'd be no one willing to buy, or maybe not many people willing to buy 17 million coins all at once. So that's something to keep in mind as well. If the price never exceeds $2, then none of this really comes into effect. This only really starts to matter once the price gets to around $100 or so. But after that, it will be very, very noticeable that this coin should experience less variance than some other coins. However, yeah, it doesn't prevent the initial 17 million people from like just selling all their coins instantly. And then as in terms of the size of the amounts of coins that will be sold, it will be something close to like 10,000 coins will be sold at the very low prices, and then also 10,000, roughly 10,000 coins might be sold at this $400 price. But then as you get into these bigger numbers, it might be only like 50 coins that are sold, but 50 times 300,000 is still a huge amount of US dollar amounts that can be used to reduce variance. And okay, so to go back on this, so this does not prevent the coin from going down infinitely. It can go infinitely down, but if it was to spike up, like you see in particular with ICOs and new products and so forth, if the coin was to spike up, this in effect prevents it from spiking up. So whereas some ICOs, some coins, etc., they might go from $2 to $200 and then back down to 20. Well, the reason it goes from 2 to 200 is because everyone refuses to sell until it gets to $200. And then there was never sufficient demands to maintain the coin supply, and so then it falls back down. So with this system, there will be coins mandated to be sold all throughout at like price checkpoints, so that whereas another coin might go from $2 to $200, this coin would probably go from 2 to 6, and then back down to 4, or back down to 3, or something like that. It would be a much more flat escalation of price, because 150,000 coins is a very large amount of coins to try to promote price stability. Um, but secondly, these checkpoints are just frequent, and they will be public, so other people could presumably act upon them as well. And if they act in a very similar way, then what you will see is that even if 10,000 coins are sold at $2, um, then other people might they might do this as well, and in fact, it creates a bigger amount of coins that are sold at these price checkpoints. So I think that does a pretty good job of describing the economics of Bitcoin 1776. Um, and I'll just reiterate this little part. I kind of did in a different video, but just to in the long term. So at a spot price of $1 million, Bitcoin 1776 in 2021, or after the halving, Bitcoin 1776 would have a an expense of roughly $7 billion a year that it would have to pull from the generalized economy in order to sustain a $1 million price point per coin after all these are dealt with. And then in Bitcoin itself, in order to sustain a $10,000 value today, it has to have $7 billion roughly pulled from the economy to sustain that price. So that's just, I think that's fairly easy to understand, but that's just the economic difference between these two coins. It's technically a 50 to 1. Just to be aware of the exact math there, it's exactly 50 to 1. But but how it's still not zero. I do want to emphasize that it's still not zero. So there, it's not like proof of stake as some people talk about, but it is a 50x reduction, or 2% of 100. Are the costs of Bitcoin 1776, excluding these little initiating coins. Now, also just to be a little bit clear on this, Bitcoin itself will issue more coins than 17.76 million, which is the maximum of these coins of this system. Bitcoin itself will issue more than 17.76 million within 1 year. Within 1 year, Bitcoin will issue more coins than this coin will ever. Okay, and then also for everybody who's a Bitcoin owner, as of July 4th, 2018, their ownership of the final product of Bitcoin, it was 82%. That will increase to 96% of this coin. And this coin will be traded under the ticker of JFK one day, maybe. But it'll be traded under it will be tracked under the ticker of JFK, and it will be referenced as a Kennedy coin. And then in terms of our units, our minimum unit will be called a Franklin instead of a Satoshi. Here we go, yeah. So the minimum unit will be a Franklin instead of a Satoshi, and then Bitcoin uses like milli Satoshi and 1,000 Satoshi, I think. And for our coin, they'll be called a Payne, a Malcolm, and a Kennedy. A Kennedy being the equivalent of a Bitcoin in unit sizes. So so I think that covers that quite well. So let's go ahead and end the economic discussion. I hope you like that. Now, there's no real plans to. This coin might become traded one day, but I'm not particularly worried about it. If it happens, it happens. There you go. But you can mine it now, and it is mineable with regular computers. I think blocks are currently being found about like once an hour, something like that. So you can mine it with just a regular computer right now, so that's quite a good thing. The something else I don't think I mentioned in this video regarding the economy on merchandising, I do not recommend that this coin be used for merchandising in the near term. Let's just say a value's more than 10,000 bucks, and this includes deposits and withdrawals from exchanges, which is the main time that this question comes up. So I will encourage exchanges, if there are exchanges that take on this coin, I will encourage that they keep the maximum withdrawal and deposit amounts to be quite low unless the coin acquires a significant value. And of course, if it does that, then it makes sense. So what I say here in terms of merchandising, the easiest way to think about it is in terms of when you think about the maximum amount, you want to think in terms of the coin payout. So 0.25 coins are paid every 10 minutes. So if it was being mined regularly, so if these coins were worth $100,000, then the maximum amount a merchant could deposit and withdraw relatively safely, if you want to say 25% of value paid for security, which is about what I would recommend, then they can deposit and withdraw one coin every 10 minutes because 0.25 or 25% of a coin is paid every 10 minutes for security. So you always want to think about it in terms of the maximum amount. You always want to think about it in terms of coins. But in terms of the minimum amount, it's kind of a different issue. And it's basically, are people going to cheat and commit a high-tech version of fraud for less than $10,000? Probably not. That's my opinion. I think the setup costs would just be too high. And this is the rewind attack risk. I'm not going to talk about that. But regardless, the setup costs I think would just be too high. Getting all the people and committing to doing it, I think it's just not worthwhile. So so in terms of the minimum value, you basically have to take a guess at what the setup fee is, and let's just say the setup fee is more than 10,000 bucks to try to defraud Bitcoin or this coin, which use the same system. And then in terms of the maximum amount, you want to think about how many relative to how many coins are being paid every 10 minutes. So with Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash, there are 12.5 coins paid every 10 minutes. And if you enjoy my suggestion of 25% of value transferred paid to security to protect the transference for merchants, then this would equate to exactly 50 coins transferred every 10 minutes that a merchant could feel comfortable accepting or depositing or withdrawing or transferring of goods without substantial or increased rate of risk. So 50 coins for Bitcoin, that is $300,000, and then at 6,000 bucks, and then 50 coins for BCH at like a $500 valuation, that would be $25,000. So the value of the coin matters, but you can ignore all that and just think 50 coins. And then that's for a 10 minutes. So then if you wait an hour, then for BCH and BTC, that's 50 coins times 6 for 6 blocks. So 300 coins after 6 confirmations would be safe to transfer. And then when I reference it in here, you might want to wait a week for transferences of $100,000 or more. Like let's say you had $1 million transferred of JFK coins. Well, in that instance, depending on what the coin is worth, of course that changes everything depending on how much the coin is worth. But if you were to wait a month, let's just throw that out there. If you were to transfer $1 million deposit and a withdrawal of $1 million of JFK coins, and then before you allowed the withdrawal, you said that they had to wait a month for $1 million deposit, then it would also be relatively safe, as the 0.25 times 6, which happens 6 times every hour, 24 hours a day, 30 days in a month. This is going to amount to roughly 1,000 coins. Um, so yeah, so it would work in that instance. So I think that covers. I kind of think of these coins more as a collector's item. I think would be a much better way to think about them. Again, of course, merchants can accept them and you can use them for mercantile purposes. I don't recommend it for amounts more than 10,000 bucks. So for small selling of goods, I think it's good. But for exchanges, for this coin in particular, I do recommend very small or or to space out the deposit and withdrawal time periods, or to only allow small deposits and small withdrawals at a time. That would be my recommendation to reduce the risk of a rewind attack. All right. I think that covers everything necessary when it comes to thinking about the economics of Bitcoin 1776. Thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe.